Starting off at number 10, we have the Russian kindergartner. Now, this story surrounds a girl who was Russian in her past life. Her mother claims that when her daughter was learning the alphabet, she kept mixing up her letters. She would mix up her B's and V's and H's and N's. These letters aren't that similar, so it left her and her teacher confused, especially since her daughter kept saying, "I don't remember those." This little girl then states that she remembers the letter H and that it makes an N sound. Then she said that she knew more letters and began to write out the Russian alphabet. Her mom asked her where she learned that, and she said, "Vlad taught me before he disappeared," and not Vlad the vampire. This little girl claimed that Vlad was her brother in her past life. How freaky! Like, there's no way that this young girl just happened to know the Russian alphabet, unless it was from her past life. At number 9, we have the daughter who just wants to go home. This mother claims that when her daughter was young, she kept begging her mom to take her home. When she asked where her home was, she said that she used to live near the water with her other family. That was until one day she passed away. She would even draw pictures of her past home and retell memories of her watching the waves. She also refers to her mom as Pa and wants to go back home to her other Mahi. Moving on to number 8, we have The Boy and the Scottish Pub. Just like the title suggests, this story takes place in a pub in Scotland. When a 4-year-old and his family stopped at a pub in a small village in Cairngorms, the little boy recognized the pub immediately and said, "My favorite place." The boy was able to direct his dad to the bathroom in the pub, which was said to be hidden behind a wall and not even labeled. Then the little boy kept saying how much he loved this pub and sitting beside the fire. But there was no fireplace, but the boy insisted that there used to be one against a certain wall. Then he continued to talk about more details of the pub and about the owner and his friend Fred. Bar staff then said that his claims were correct. Fred was the owner there, but passed away 10 years ago. Okay, wow. Either this kid has been sneaking out and partying it up at this pub, or he truly did go there in his past life. Moving on to number 7, we have the boy who is his own grandfather. Yeah, you heard me correctly. This boy claims to be the reincarnation of his grandfather. A year before Gus Taylor was born, his grandfather had passed away. However, when the baby was 18 months, he started referring to himself as his own grandfather, Grandpa Augie. When he was 4, he could point out his grandpa in photographs despite never even seeing him before. Gus would also talk about his sister. Now, the grandfather's sister had been murdered and they always kept that from Gus, but somehow he already knew this detail and would continuously talk about his past sister. Creepy. And also super confusing. So the grandfather was the dad to Gus's mom, but his mom gave birth to her dad, the grandfather? That's so weird. Next up at number 6, we have Cameron McCauley. Now, there is a short little documentary on Cameron in case you are wondering and want to check it out as well. So basically, when Cameron was 2 years old, he kept saying that he had another life on a remote island called Barra. Now, Cameron was from Glasgow, but Barra is an hour flight away, approximately 220 miles from Glasgow. For 3 years, Cameron kept talking about his family in Barra. He said he had brothers and sisters and even had a black and white sheepdog. He said he remembers living in a white house near the beach and remembers planes landing nearby. He even remembers the view outside from his house's window. Cameron began missing his family so much that he would become super upset. That's when they ended up going to Barra to find his home. When they did find his home, it had the same view that Cameron described and was apparently even home to the same dog. However, Cameron said he had a father named Shane Robertson that passed away from getting hit in a car. This is the one thing that doesn't check out. Apparently there was never a Shane Robertson that lived there, so who's Shane? Honestly, maybe it was his father from like 2 lives ago. Who even knows? We are now at our halfway mark with Shanti Devi. Shanti Devi was born in 1926 in India. When she was 4 years old, she started making claims about her real name, her other family, and her past life. Apparently, she told her parents that she lived 145 kilometers away in a place called Mathura with her husband Kedar Nath. She also said that she died after giving birth to her child. Apparently, she even had the same talking habits as someone from Mathura. Her family eventually took her to the other village and found the man she claimed to be her husband by the name of Kedar Nath. Kedar then told them that he did lose his wife 9 years ago, 10 days after delivering their son. Now, Kedar was skeptical of this girl's claims, so when he went to go meet Shanti, he pretended to just be his brother. But Shanti instantly recognized him as her husband from her past life. Next on my list at number 4, we have James Leyanger. Born in 1998, when James was 2, he claimed to be a lieutenant and passed away when his plane was shot down. Now, just like any other parent would do, they just brushed it aside, saying that he had a wild imagination. But then he kept describing accurate information. When they researched into this plane crash, they found that there was an American pilot named Lieutenant James Houston Jr. who passed away in 1945 towards the end of World War II. First off, what are the odds that he gets reincarnated and his parents literally picked the same name? Now, the boy continued to talk about his ship, the Natoma, which was also true. He would also have reoccurring nightmares about an airplane crash. His parents then met Lieutenant James's crew, who are all old by now, but they confirmed the details that James mentioned, saying that they were all accurate and only the lieutenant and the crew could have known some of the details. Coming in at number 3, we have Edward Austrian. Edward Austrian was 4 years old when he claimed that he was a soldier from World War I. He kept saying that he passed away after taking a bullet to the throat. In fact, Edward continuously would get sore throats and would say that his shot wound was hurting. Doctors couldn't even explain why he was constantly getting these sore throats, and in fact he even developed a cyst in his throat at one point. Eventually the cyst mysteriously went away on its own after Edward started talking more about his past life. He claims that he was a soldier named James that was 18 years old. He has vivid memories from his past life that he would share with his family. One day he said, and I quote, "We were walking along through the mud. It was damp, it was cold. My rifle is heavy. I remember looking out and seeing trees, and then there was desolation. I heard a shot come from behind. It went through someone else, hit me square in the back of the neck, and I felt my throat fill with blood." There's no way a 4-year-old could have made up those details, especially since his parents claim that they've never let him watch any soldier or war-related movies or shows. Next up at number 2, we have the boy from Thailand. Chennai was 3 years old when he started having memories of his past life. This 3-year-old boy remembers being a teacher named Bua Kai. He talked about his previous family, wife, and children. He said that he passed away after being shot in the head while walking to school. What's freaky is that this boy has 2 birthmarks on his face. One on the back of his head and one above his left eye. Those are the exact spots where the bullet entered and exited Buakai's head. Now, people believe that birthmarks tell some sort of story from our past lives. In this case, it symbolizes how he was killed in his past. Now, Buakai was a real person that passed away about 5 years before Chennai was born. Coming in at number 1, we have the boy who solved his own murder. When a boy in Syria Golan Heights was 3, he began saying that he had been murdered in his past life. The boy said that he was killed by getting an axe to his head. This boy even had a long red birthmark on his head. In this boy's case, the birthmark also showed the way that he passed away. Now, it turns out that this boy's story checked out. They took him to the village that he said he once lived in, and even showed his family where his body was buried. When they unearthed his body, they found a boy's skeleton with an axe wound in the skeleton's skull. Like, there's no way that a kid could have just known where a body was buried by coincidence. But it doesn't stop there. The kid also remembered who the killer was and his full name. They then confronted him and he eventually admitted to the crime. To kick off this countdown, at number 10, we have the horseback rider. Veronica Lamry shared her story about her son that remembered his past life. She states that when her son was around the age of 2, he would constantly talk about being a grown man that would ride his horses through the woods. However, he said that one day he died while riding. He claims that everything went dark and that's when he had a new mommy. Veronica asked her son where he got hurt and all he did was point to a birthmark on his stomach. Like I mentioned in part 1 of this video, birthmarks are said to be a symbol of your past life and are supposed to tell some sort of story. In this case, it symbolized how he passed away. His mom believes that he fell off his horse and landed on something sharp and punctured his stomach. Do any of you guys have any noteworthy birthmarks? Let me know in the comments below. Moving on at number 9, we have the boy who is his own brother. As weird as that sounds, it's the truth. So a boy named PM was born 12 years after his brother passed away from neuroblastoma. As a result, his brother developed a limp, went blind in his left eye, and underwent numerous surgeries. Now, when PM was born, he had multiple birthmarks that corresponded to his brother's surgery marks. The brother had chemotherapy done on his jugular vein, and PM had a dark mark there. His brother had a biopsy done right above his right ear, and PM had a bump there. Now, the freakiest part was how PM developed corneal glaucoma and went blind in his left eye, just like his brother. And when he began to walk, he did so with a limp, although nothing was wrong with his legs. Lastly, he also would talk about his brother's scalp surgery, although no one ever told him of it. So yeah, if this is true, then this boy is his own brother. Next up at number 8, we have Kendra Carter. When Kendra was 4 years old, her mother decided to put her in swimming lessons. That's when Kendra felt really attached to her swim coach. She began saying that the coach's baby had passed away and claimed that that was her. She told her mom, "I'm the baby that was in her tummy." Now, they did find out that the coach lost her baby 9 years before Kendra was born. Kendra loved spending time with her coach, and when she wasn't, she was very quiet. Unfortunately, the coach and Kendra's mom got into an argument, and Kendra was no longer allowed to see her. As a result, Kendra fell into depression and barely spoke for 4.5 months. The coach eventually reconnected with the family, and Kendra went back to her old self. Honestly, that just must have been really hard for Kendra's mom. Like, having a child who feels more connected to another woman, that's really hard to go through. At number 7, we have the Egyptian daughter. So when this girl was young, she would have vivid dreams about the Egyptian pyramids. When she turned 8, she started to describe in detail the pharaoh's tombs. She would also tell her mom about the royal family members and their relationship to each other. She also remembers having conversations with the royals' maids about the royals' family secrets. She even was familiar with hieroglyphics and remembers having a conversation with someone that she referred to as a goddess and her protector. That's pretty amazing. Like, I want to know some of those family secrets. That's really cool. Coming in at number 6, we have the kid who is his own grandpa. 3 months after her father passed away, this woman became pregnant with a boy. When he was born, she claimed that he had a lot of similarities to her dad. She would always joke around with her husband saying that her son is the reincarnation of her dad. Well, turns out that might be true. The first letters that her son wrote were G-U-Y, which in fact was her dad's name. She also claims that they have some of the same mannerisms. Now, her dad passed away from a heart attack. Creepily enough, her son has a birthmark right over his heart. In a way, she gave birth to her dad. It sounds so weird to say that, but we are now in our 5th and halfway mark with the car accident. One day when Julie and her 4-year-old daughter Lily were out shopping, she began to remember how she passed away in her previous life. Lily began by pointing at a car and saying, "That car hit me." When her mom asked her what she meant, she said, "Before I lived with you and daddy, I lived with another mommy and daddy." Then she remembers how her blood ran cold. All throughout the day, she kept telling her mom more details about her death. She said that she was hit by a red car. She remembers being in an ambulance and remembers her feet hurting. That's really scary. In our 4th spot, we have Suzanne Ghanim. So back in the 1930s, a woman named Hanan Mansour passed away after giving birth to her 3rd child. However, before she passed away, she told her husband that she was going to be reincarnated and would remember their life together. Well, Hanan was right about that, because 10 days after she passed away, a girl named Suzanne was born. When Suzanne was 16 months, she would pick up a phone and repeat, "Hello, Layla." Now, that seems like nothing. Except one of Hanan's daughters was named Layla, and before she passed away, she tried to call Layla, but was never able to reach her. Then when Suzanne grew up, she recalled memories of 13 people from her other life. The two families ended up connecting, and they remained in contact for the rest of their lives. Hanan's husband even regarded Suzanne as a member of his own family. Coming in at number 3, we have a girl who remembered being on the Titanic. This woman claims that when she was 12, she started getting memories of her being on a ship. She stated that she would often be overwhelmed by a claustrophobic feeling and a rocking sensation, as if being in a small room on a ship. Now, one day she ended up watching a history program on the Titanic. That's when she would see clips of people and clearly recognize them and remember their names before the film even mentioned who they were. Then she visited a Titanic exhibition in Copenhagen. When she saw the reconstruction of some of the cabins, she immediately fell ill and had the same rocking sensation. Now, the freakiest part is when she saw a ring in the exhibition which supposedly belonged to an unidentified female traveler. She immediately felt a connection to that ring and knew that it was her engagement ring. In our second spot, we have the reincarnation of Anne Frank. Yeah, that's right, this next young girl claims that she is the reincarnation of Anne Frank. So I'm sure we have all heard of the sad story of Anne Frank. Well, 9 years after she passed away, a girl named Barbo was born. Now, as soon as Barbo could speak, she said that she wasn't in her real home and stated that her parents were not her real parents. She also would have nightmares of men breaking through her attic door. When Barbo discovered who Anne Frank was, she realized that they shared a lot of the same memories. When she was 10 years old, she visited Amsterdam and took her parents to Anne Frank's house with no directions or help. When in the house, she knew the entire layout of it and took her parents to the attic. Now, sadly, Barbo struggled a lot during her childhood to get past all the fears that she had from her past memories. And in our number 1 spot, we have the Hollywood star. Now, this next kid remembers being an actor from Hollywood. How cool is that? So this little boy's name is Ryan, and when he was 5 years old, that's when he started claiming that he was someone else. He claimed that his real home was Hollywood and he missed dancing in Broadway productions. He also remembers meeting some stars like Rita Hayworth and remembers an agency where people would frequently change their names. Now, how on earth does a little 5-year-old know so much about the industry? He also said he used to live on a street with the word rock in its name. Now, his mother Cindy was so shocked at how much information Ryan knew, so she decided to do some research of her own. She found a photo while researching Hollywood stars, and Ryan pointed to a man and said, "That's him." The man's name was Marty Martin. He was a movie extra in the film Night After Night, as well as a Hollywood agent. Now, all of Ryan's claims checked out. Marty danced on Broadway, worked at an agency who created new stage names for their clients, and even lived at 825 North Roxbury Drive. Rocks. Ryan also knew how many times Marty was married and knew that he had 2 sisters. So what do you all think of this one? I say put his acting and dancing skills to the test. See if he's still got it. Starting off this countdown, we have the mother named Sally. Sounds like a title to an upcoming horror movie. This mother states that one day her daughter started to tell her about her past life and her horrific death. She said that her previous mother's name was Sally and that she died a long time ago on a Thursday. Then she said that on that day she was playing with her father's gun when it accidentally went off and shot and killed her mom, Sally. Then when her mom dismissed this, saying that it's not true, her daughter said, "We come back, mommy." Maybe I should mention that this girl was 4 years old at the time. Pretty unusual for a 4-year-old to say things like that. The mother even claims that her daughter has never met anyone named Sally or even watched any shows with a character named Sally in it. She also says that she has never even told her about guns, and she hasn't even watched any violent shows. Making our way down the list, at number 9 we have the surfer. This next mother claims that when her son was 3 years old, he would talk about stuff that he possibly could not have known at that age. It first started when he would refer to someone named Bubba, who was apparently a friend in his past life. Then he also would talk about how he had a wood-paneled station wagon, and he also said that he used to surf a lot. Now, the mother says that they are from the Midwest. Her son has never seen an ocean or a surfboard. In our 8th spot, we have the Titanic. So in my last video, I talked about the girl that clearly remembers being on the Titanic when it sunk. Well, according to this next story, we have another individual who remembers the same thing. So this woman states that when her nephew was 4 years old, he would talk about the Titanic all the time. There's just one thing. He never even learned about it, and he never watched the movie. One day he just started mentioning it. He also claims that he had a wife he was aboard the ship with when he remembers all of a sudden feeling really cold. Every time he watches a movie that has boats in it or large bodies of water, he freaks out. Moving on to number 7, we have the war memories. When this next boy was younger, he remembers being a soldier in war. In fact, the memories of him being at war are very vivid, and he still remembered them as he got older. So he claims that he remembers being at war surrounded by helicopters as him and other soldiers were firing back while crouched behind a building. Then he says that he remembers a guy running out of a building with a kid when the kid gets shot out of nowhere. He also remembers the way that he died. He said that he was crouching in tall grass when he was shot dead. He claims that he felt a hard thunk saw part of his chest explode, and then he fell forward where his vision went black. When he was young, his parents claimed that he would constantly draw pictures depicting war and soldiers. His mom also said that when he began to talk, he would say things like "heavy fire" and "zip 'em boys." His parents also claimed that he never watched any war or fighting movies. In our 6th spot, we have the Japanese soldier. On December 26, 1953, a girl named Ma Ting-ong Meo was born. As she got older, she recalls being a male Japanese soldier that was killed during World War II. In fact, she developed a fear of planes. Whenever one passed overhead, she was scared that they were going to shoot at her. As she continued to get older, she kept saying her home was in Japan. She also recalled being killed by a machine gun fire from an aircraft. Ma-tin was born with a thumb-sized birthmark on her groin. Presumably, that is where she got shot and died. She also remembers facts like having 5 children, her oldest child being a male who was an army cook. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Swarnlata Mishra. When this girl was 3 years old, she remembered her past life in which she was a girl called Baya Pathak. Now, Swarnlata lived in a small village in India, and Baya lived in a village 100 miles away from her. She described her past house as being white with 4 rooms. She also would sing songs that she remembered from her past life and remembered complex dance routines. Eventually, they found a woman named Baya that lived in that village that died 9 years prior. Her and her father ended up visiting that family. To test her daughter, her father ended up introducing her to people who he claimed were her family members, but weren't. But Swarnlata immediately called him out on it. She knew who her real past family members were. In our 4th spot, we have the Tibetan Lama. In 1991, a boy named Sonam Wangdu was born. When he was 2, he realized he was the reincarnation of the Tibetan Lama, Deshung Rinpoche. In fact, there have been 4 reincarnations of him. He's pretty powerful to say the least, he just keeps coming back. When he was younger, Sonam had visions of his mother and knew words spoken by the 3rd reincarnated Deshung. In fact, the 3rd reincarnated Lama a year before his death said, "I will be reborn in Seattle," where Wangdu was born. Eventually, he left his family to go to Nepal, where he was raised by monks before becoming the head of monastery there. When he was asked how long he would stay in Nepal, he replied with, "Lots of time. I'm just going to stay here a long time." I mean, it's true because he just keeps being reincarnated. In our 3rd spot, we have the drowning tragedy. A young girl in Sri Lanka claims that she remembers drowning in a flooded paddy field. She said that right before she died, she remembers a bus driving by and splashing her with water. In fact, this girl ended up developing a fear of buses and water. After doing research, they discovered that this was in fact true. A girl in a nearby village drowned after she stepped backwards to avoid a passing bus. She ended up falling back into the deep overflooded paddy field and drowned. Moving on to number 2, we have the famous golfer. When a little boy was 3 years old, he claimed that he was the famous golfer Bobby Jones. One day, this boy, we will refer to him as Hunter because his name was not shared. Well, one day, Hunter came across a picture of Bobby Jones and said, "That's me." Now, to make sure that his son wasn't making it up, his dad laid out 6 photos of different famous golfers. But Hunter still correctly identified Bobby. He then saw a photo of Harry Vardon and he said, "That's my friend, Harry Garden." That's really funny. But seriously, like, he knew who that man was. Hunter was also able to correctly identify which house belonged to Bobby. And Hunter himself is even an incredible golfer. He has won 41 out of 50 junior tournaments by the age of 7. 21 of the tournament wins were in a row. So the parents are fully convinced that they gave birth to the reincarnation of Bobby Jones. And in our number 1 spot, we have the Pollock twins. Now, I've mentioned the Pollock twins before, but let me go more in depth. On May 7th, 1957, 2 sisters named Joanna, age 11, and Jacqueline, age 6, were hit by a car on their way to church. The parents, Florence and John Pollock, were grief-stricken, but the father always remained hopeful, saying that his daughters would come back to them. He even said that they would be reborn in the form of twins. Well, in 1958, Florence gave birth to 2 girl twins, just as her husband predicted. They named them Jillian and Jennifer. Over the years, these twins began to start to resemble their previous daughters. Jillian was more slender, just like Joanna was, and Jennifer was more stocky, just like Jacqueline was. When Jacqueline was alive, she struggled with writing since she would hold the pencil in her fist. Jennifer would do the same thing. At one point, the girls even asked for the same toys that the previous sisters owned. And when they both got dolls, they named it the same name that Joanna and Jacqueline gave their dolls. The parents always hid the tragic past for them, so it's not like they knew any of this. These twins also shared the same birthmarks as the other girls. Jennifer had the same birthmark on her waist that Jacqueline had, and Jennifer had a birthmark on her forehead that was the same spot where Jacqueline had a scar. The girls were also terrified of cars and crossing the street. And then we have the creepy part. One time, the girls were caught playing a game and they were discussing details of the accident that they died in. Details they couldn't have known unless they were the reincarnation of the other girls. Starting off this countdown, we have the kid who is his own grandfather. As you saw in my other 3 videos, if you watched them, this has been a reoccurring theme. Lots of boys have been born and then claimed that they were their deceased grandfather. So here's another case just like that. When Ron and Kathy's son Sam was just 2, he started to say weird things like, "When I was your age, I changed your diaper," referring to his dad. That's a super weird thing for a 2-year-old to say. What's even weirder is how at 18 months, Sam was able to speak in full sentences. He would say words like portal. When his parents asked what he meant, he said that when he passed away, he went whoosh and came out of the portal. His parents started to believe him and began asking him more questions. Sam told his parents that he used to have a sister who turned into a fish by some bad guys, then she died. Okay, this may sound silly to hear, but Sam's grandfather had a sister who was murdered. Her body was found floating in the San Francisco Bay. Then when his parents asked him how he died, Sam slapped the top of his head as if he was hurting. Well, Sam's grandfather passed away from cerebral hemorrhage. Coming in at number 9, we have the Colonel. And I hate how Colonel is spelt colonial, like C-O-L-O-N-E-L. Like, where's the cur sound? There's no R. Like, what's going on? Anyway, from a young age, a boy named Matthew would remember distinct details of his past life in Russia during World War II. It started off when Matthew would always draw really graphic pictures like of dead people on the ground in war. When asked about it, he said, and I quote, "Stay out of my business, my men were dying at that time." Matthew's mom ended up putting him in therapy to see if the therapist could explain Matthew's odd behavior. At therapy, Matt told the therapist that his real name was Polkovnik Ivanovsky. The therapist also realized that some of his drawings looked like a map of Frankfurt, Germany and Russia. He believes that Matthew was once a colonel in the Soviet Union. He learned that one time he was interrogated and was stabbed in his left thigh, the same spot where Matthew has a birthmark. He also learned that Matthew died a gruesome death. Eventually, Matthew, his mom, and aunt all went to Russia and he managed to lead them to his resting place. The tombstone read, Polkovnik Yevgeny Ivanovsky, 1878 to 1952. He was indeed a colonel. Making our way down list of number 8, we have the piano prodigy. David Sukhombi was born in England in the 1930s. Later, he changed his name to be Vladimir Levinsky. From a young age, Vladimir was a very talented piano player. He claimed that he was able to teach himself without taking any lessons. As he slowly got older, Vladimir realized that he was the reincarnation of Franz Liszt, a German composer and piano player. Vladimir was extremely talented. By 21, he was performing for packed concert halls. However, it is said that he got too obsessed with Franz and his past life. Enough so that during his concert in 1952, he stopped halfway to share his reincarnation story with the audience and talk about Franz. In our 7th spot, we have Gone with the Wind. When a boy named Lee was just 2 years old, he claimed he had a different house and another mother. When he was 3, he said his real birthday was June 26th instead of June 21st, the day he was actually born. He also said that he had a daughter named Jennifer and his middle name was Ko, and that he wrote movies for a living. He also stated that he passed away when he was only 48 years old. His parents began to use this information to try and see what movies he would claim that he wrote. His parents read out a list of older movies to Lee, and when they said Gone with the Wind, Lee became excited and said he wrote the screenplay for the film. Well, turns out the man that wrote the screenplay for Gone with the Wind was named Sidney Ko Howard, born on June 26th, passed away at the age of 48, and indeed had a daughter named Jennifer. All of their sons' facts checked out. Hey, this kid should get on writing more screenplays. Who knows, maybe he'll once again become a well-known writer. Coming in at number 6, we have the reincarnated murder victim. In 1950, a woman named Karen Phil gave birth to a boy named Semi. She claims that before he was born, he was visited in her dreams by a man with a bloody face who said his name was Selem Festley. Well, when her son was able to talk, he claimed that he was this man. He said that he lived in a nearby village and was murdered by his neighbor. When Semi was 4, he went to Festley's old village and talked with his wife. He was able to recount his life with her together in great detail. Then his wife also said that he was shot by his neighbor, but the neighbor states that it was just a hunting accident. But Semi, being his supposed reincarnation, knew that he was killed because of an argument over his mule grazing in the neighbor's field. Over the years, Semi would go back to the village to visit his past wife and children. He also would throw rocks at his neighbor as revenge. But he never got any more violent than that, with fear that the neighbor would also be reincarnated and come back for him for revenge. Can you imagine just like a perpetual cycle of them being reincarnated to like continue getting revenge on each other? That'd be funny. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the bicyclist. Several years ago in Sri Lanka, a girl named Purnina Akanyaki was born. When she was young, she kept describing her past life. After visiting a temple 145 miles away from her home on a school trip, she claimed that she lived in the town across the river from the temple. She also claimed that in her past life, she was a male incest maker who died in a traffic accident. Her dad ended up traveling to that town and asked about an incest maker who passed away. That's when they found out that there was a man named Jinadasa. He was an incest maker and passed away after being hit by a bus while riding his bicycle. This little girl ended up going to Jinadasa's home and correctly identified his wife, daughter, and the school that he went to. Freakiest part? This girl was born with birthmarks along her lower ribs and chest. Well, autopsy reports of Jinadasa revealed he had several fractures and bruises in the identical spot. In our 4th spot, we have the Titanic. There are so many kids that remember being on the Titanic the day that it sunk. It's extremely sad, but also really interesting. 2 years after the Titanic sank, a little boy was born. He had a bunch of visions as a child, which led him to believe that he was on the Titanic when it sank. He said that he was on the ship with his family and was only 2 years old at the time of his death. When he got older, he began to remember more details, like staying in the 3rd class cabin. He also recalled his name was something AED. Upon looking at the Titanic passenger list, there was a boy named Alfred Peacock who was on the Titanic in the 3rd class cabin with his mom and sister. Moving on, in our 3rd spot, we have the grandson. This story was shared by a woman who lost her son at a young age. Eventually, she gave birth to another son who gave birth to her first grandchild. Since the day her grandson was born, she said that he looked nearly identical to her son that passed away. When the grandson got older, he would sometimes call his grandma Mom. When she corrected him, he was adamant that she was his mom. Then one day he pointed to a photo of this woman's deceased son and said, "That's me when I got bigger." Again, she corrected him and he said, "I was in 2 mama's tummies. You're my mom when I was bigger." Coming in at number 2, we have the Chicago fire. When Erica Ruhlman's son Luke was just 5 years old, he kept referring to toys and objects as Pam. He would always say that he remembers he was once a girl with black hair that wore the same earrings as his mom does. When his mom finally decided to ask who Pam was, Luke claimed that he was. He said, "Well, I used to be, but I died and I went up to heaven. Eventually, God pushed me back down, and when I woke up, I was a baby and you named me Luke." Luke also said that he used to live in Chicago where he would take the train a lot, and that he passed away in a fire. When talking about it, Luke made the motion indicating that Pam jumped out the window. After doing some research, Erica found that in March of 1993, the Paxton Hotel in Chicago had a fire. The freakiest part? A woman named Pam Robinson died after she jumped out the window trying to escape the fire. Coincidence? I don't know so much. In my last video, somebody commented that these kids can easily research these stories. Okay, because a 5-year-old is capable of proper spelling to search these topics and then also can read and understand these complex articles, yes. If that's the case, then we have a child genius. And in our number 1 spot, we have the serial killer. I'm sure a bunch of us wish that we were someone cool in our past life, like a famous actor or singer or public figure. But What would you do if you believed that you were a serial killer in your past life? This story was posted on Reddit. The user claims that ever since he was little, he had vivid dreams about being a serial killer from around the 1940s or 50s. He claims that he remembers living in an old farmhouse secluded in the middle of the woods. He claims that that's also where he buried all of his victims. He states that there are at least 50 women, all with medium-length jet black hair, that he ended up murdering. He has tried searching online to try and find his past self, but he believes that he never got caught. Man, that would be super freaky if somehow like the cops could just find this isolated house and just dig around to see if they find the bones of these women and see if this guy's story actually checks out.